Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. Today we continue our free mixing course, and today we're going to cover limiters and how to use them. Limiters do more than just make stuff loud, but I'm going to show you the differences in making stuff loud using a limiter. You don't just want to smash a limiter, but sometimes you do because you just want to be quick. So let's hop into a DAW and show you the differences here. So I have 3 of the same exact drum break. And what I'll do is I'll process these completely differently from each other. So the first one we're going to leave blank, and then we're going to run into a limiter. So I have the FabFilter Pro L2 on my master track. Now I have it off for now because I don't want to, it has like a delay when I hear myself. So we're just going to leave the volume as is. Let's turn these down a little bit. Okay. Now on track 2, what we're going to do is clip the drums. Okay, so I'm going to run them through a T-Rex classic clipper. You can use the Fruity soft clipper and do the same concept. Okay, so if you want the free version, Fruity soft clipper, where you at? Here it is. All you want to do on the Fruity soft clipper is just turn your threshold up to make it more of a hard clipping sound, even though it's a soft clipper. But your threshold actually, long story short, just turn your threshold up, okay? And then push the volume going into your soft clipper. So you're going to have to add either a Fruity Balance or a Parametric EQ2 and use the left side and turn up the drums going into the Fruity soft clipper. I'll show you what that sounds like in a little bit. Sounds confusing, but it's not. Okay, let's add a soft clipper, a classic clipper to the second run of these drums. And my goal here is to shave off the transient information. So the reason I'm using drums is because they're very pointy. So you can see how in the waveform we have a very pointy orientation here. You see it's super pointy and it's almost, the points are reaching each side of the waveform or each side of this wave display, okay? So what I wanna do in step 2 is shave off those transients. And what I'll do is I'll visually do this into Edison so you can see what's happening as I'm turning knobs. Okay, let's record on input and then I'll show you what I'm doing. So let's have this open. I realize my webcam's kind of big, so bear with me. I'm gonna make it as full screen as possible. So what I'm going to do here is, again, run the sound through a soft clipper, a classic clipper. I keep saying soft clipper by habit, okay, to chop off transients. So I'm going to loop this drum loop, loop the drum loop, okay. Let's record input, and let me make sure we're actually on the right one. Why is it recording 2? This needs to be 9. All right, I clearly didn't route these, my bad. Okay, so now we have it going through the clipper. So now the job of the clipper is to take off that pointiness of the audio. The reason I want to take off the pointiness is because the pointiness will make the limiter overreact. So imagine, let me go full screen on this one. So imagine, when you're compressing, okay, you have what's called a threshold. So a limiter is basically just a compressor that's working really, really, really hard, okay? So the threshold is this horizontal line. Now the signal is a vertical line going up, okay, the pointiness of the audio. Those transients, they're so pointy that it goes beyond the threshold and it forces the limiter to smack those sounds back down, but it causes a certain type of sound. It causes a very compressed sound and it triggers the compressor every time. So it pulls down the entire track every time those pointy parts go past that threshold. It pulls everything down. It's not just pulling the transients down, it's pulling everything down, depending on your settings. So our goal is to keep the threshold the same, but figure out a way to make this stuff less pointy so it doesn't reach as high. So now when it's going up in volume and stuff, it's not, eating up so much headroom, we call it, okay? All that excess space that those pointy parts are taking up. So now we get to bring more headroom back, and now you can push it even harder because it takes a longer time for that sound to go past that threshold. So this sounds a little more complex than in practice. So let's just do it in practice to show you what this stuff sounds like. So again, we have Edison, which is recording the waveform. And my whole goal is to show you how it's chopping off the pointy parts of the audio. So let's record. Okay, so the drums are very pointy. Now what I'm gonna do is turn this to hard clipping. So it's gonna shave off the top of that pointiness, depending on how hard I push it through the clipper here. So let's crank it on the input. Now I've increased the volume, so I need to pull down the output volume because I've increased the overall volume. So now you can see it's not as pointy as it was before. Now here's without. I'm just looking at like the average volume, trying to use my ear here. It's a little bit louder than the original, so let me pull it back a little bit. Okay, so it's a huge difference. Sounds the same in volume, but look at the transient energy that we're taking out that we don't necessarily need. And this is why I'm explaining this concept over drums. It's because most people don't understand how much excess transient energy they have. I'm a sound designer and I understand that when I'm making hi-hats, they're super pointy for no reason. They don't need to be that pointy. So we're chopping off that excess energy that we can't really perceive anyway. It's just so fast. Now you can tell there's a little difference, but in a mix, you can't really tell, okay? So what I've done for those who really aren't seeing what I'm doing here, now I'm really cranking this to where I'm taking out 6 dB. Okay, so I'm exaggerating this to make a point. But what we're doing, again, the practice here is with the clipper, we're chopping off that pointy part and then we're just turning the volume up so that it matches the original, okay? So if I zoom out, that's a massive, you could visually see without even zooming in, you could see how much room we just gained. So let me measure here. We were peaking at what, 0 dB, let's say roughly about -3 dB, and we shaved it off to about -8. So we gained 5 dB of average headroom, 5 dB. 5 dB is a lot of dB. That means you could turn your volume up 5 dB louder just because you got rid of that transient energy. So a lot of your mix, you want to really make sure that you need that transient energy. If not, get rid of it and you can gain more space and more headroom. So again, I'll turn my limiter on last. And then lastly, I'll run this through an analog version of what we just did basically, which is a clipper. It's chopping off the top. So this is a tape emulator. So I'm going to push the sound through my Zulu, have it come back, and we're going to record this. Now 3, do I have this even set up? Maybe it's not. Trigger, it should be triggered. Oh, because we're not playing sound through it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is overly crank the sound going out of my DAW. You don't need to memorize this. This is kind of an arbitrary point. Going out of my DAW through this Zulu tape emulator. It's going to chop off the transients and it's going to come back. So I'm exaggerating the output because I want to show you how much transient energy we could take out. Now I think we're hearing double, so let me. Oh, that's my head. So I need to physically record this because this is an analog chain. So I'll pause the video. Now that I have it recorded, you can visually see without me even going into the depths, look how much more space we have on the left side. That was me recording through analog tape, like analog tape emulation to chop off those pointy parts of the audio. And to the right, this was the original signal. It's very pointy and it eats up all that space from top to bottom in that wave display. So we've just gained a ton of headroom. If I had to go in and measure, it looks like about 3 to 5 dB of headroom if I had to quickly guess. Okay, so that's a lot of space. So now we're gonna run this analog through the same exact limiter. And what we're gonna do is just compare all 3. I want you to hear the audio before we even go into limiting, just the volume difference. Now these are all reading at the same nominal value, the same number value of about -9 dB, but they sound louder. Even though they're reading at the same dB level, they're all louder, or excuse me, 2 and 3 are louder than the original. Okay, so again, they're all reading at about -9 dB. So they're reading at the same meter value. Every time the meter goes up and it hits a peak value, they're reading at about the same dB output, but some sound louder. So why is it that we have the same number, but we have a different loudness? It's because we're transforming that headroom and we're also turning it into more of a squared off sound, which creates upper harmonics, which we talked about in the saturation lesson. So now what we're gonna do is run this through a limiter. Okay, so this limiter, I'm going to, let me figure out how I want to set this up. If I want to have 3 different limiters or, no, I'll just use one. Okay, so let's start here on the first drum sound. Let's open this up. Just put this on all around mode. Now, keep in mind, you may hear some feedback from my headphones, so I'll try to stay away from the mic. But all I'm doing is just pushing the input gain. I'm not changing anything else within this limiter. Just push this until we start to see it taking out some dB. Now you could, instead of pushing the entire track up 8 dB, you hear how my vocals got super loud. Instead of pushing everything up inside this plugin, what you could do is just crank everything up outside the plugin. So you don't have to crank it up with the plugin because that can mess up other stuff. Okay, so I'm just pushing it this hard just because we're using this drum break. So I'm gonna mute my mic because it's gonna pick up my headphones. But I want you to see how we're gonna push the sample until we start seeing that red gain reduction, okay? So let's do an A/B of before limiting and then after limiting. It makes it a lot louder. Now, the general rule, I'm not telling you there's hard rules or soft rules, whatever, but usually you want to stay within -3 of gain reduction. If you push it past that, you're going to start hearing the compressor and it's going to sound like a very harsh compression because that's what limiting actually is. It's a ratio that's very high. You know, we talked about compression, which is like 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1. Well, limiting is like 10-to-1 and higher. It's a very, very aggressive compressor. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is just A/B before and after the limiter. So limiters just pull up that fine detail in the sound. And again, we're working on drums just so it's easier for you to understand what it's actually doing. You could apply this to any song, the same principles. Now let's do loop number 2. And I'm gonna show you how loud it can get. The same exact limiter, I'm gonna show you that it's gonna get a lot louder. And then we'll do, at the end, I'll do a limiter per track. But until then, let's just use the 1 as an example. And what I'm gonna do now is show you how hard we can push this because we got rid of all that transient energy. Now, because you can't see visually what we've done to that wave, remember, this is what we've done. We've shaved off those transients and it's more of this square looking linear sound. What you see in a playlist is not what it actually sounds like, okay? So let's see how far we can push drum loop 2. Sounds way, 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 way louder than 2. So I'm going to save these. I'll pause the video for a sec. All right. So now I have it set up to where it's directly on number 2. So we don't have to use this master track anymore. But then let's move to 3. So we pushed that extremely hard. Let's move to 3. It's so loud that to preserve this video, I'm actually going to turn down the output because this is so loud. But I just want to show you how far we can push this specific limiter. We're pushing it 13 dB. Okay, 13 dB, whereas before we pushed it about 8 dB. That's the power of headroom. Headroom gives you the ability to push something harder. So if you get rid of that transient information that's not necessary, you can push your track heavier and harder. Okay, so let's compare all 3. All right, now that we have all these 3 with limiters on them, I want you to hear them side by side. So step 1 will sound like very small and tiny. Loop number 2 will sound bigger, louder, but a little more hollow. And then beat number 3 will sound incredibly full and louder at the same exact time. So let's hear it in. And that's the power of understanding what a limiter actually does and how to create more loudness by shaving off those transients. The transient information and those peaks are super important because, again, if those peaks trigger the compressor all the time, you're not going to get your maximum ability out of your limiter. So what most people do is step one, they just crank their sounds straight into a limiter without doing any of this transient control. What people who are a little more experienced do is step two, which sounds a little bit louder and more full. They understand transient information and they shave it first. Then they go into compressors and into limiters. And that's what gives you that loudness factor. So I really wanted to show you the power of what a limiter can do and how to use it for loudness. So thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new. It's Game from BusyWorksBeats.com. Peace.